Shine squinted against the golden wash of Murkhana's primary, which had just climbed from behind the thickly forested hills that walled Murkhana city to the east. By his reckoning, he had spent close to 4 weeks confined, with hundreds of other captives, to a windowless warehouse somewhere in the city. Hours earlier, all of them had been marched through the dark to a red clay landing field that had been notched into one of the hills and was currently swarming with Republic troops. On its hard stand sat a military transport Shrine surmised would deliver everyone to a proper prison on or in orbit around some forlorn outer rim world. Thus far, though, none of the prisoners had been ordered to board the transport. Instead, a head count was being conducted. More important, the clone troopers were obviously waiting for someone or something to arrive. When his eyes had adjusted fully to the light, Shrine scanned the prisoners to all sides of him, relieved to find Bol Shatak and her Padawan standing some 50 meters away, among a mixed group of indigenous Koravar fighters and an assortment of separatist mercenaries. He called to them through the Force, figuring that Shatak would be first to respond, but it was Starstone who turned slightly in his direction and smiled faintly. Then Shatak looked his way, offering a quick nod. On their capture at the landing platform, the three of them had been separated. The fact that Shatak had managed to retain her headcloth perhaps explained why her short cranial horns hadn't singled her out as a brack and raised an alert among her captors. Assuming that the conditions of her captivity had been similar to his, Shatak's being overlooked made perfect sense to Shrine. Rounded up with hundreds of enemy fighters, following the still puzzling deactivation of Murkhana's battle droids and other war machines, Shrine had been searched, roughed up, and marched into the dark building that would become his home for the next 4 weeks, a special torment reserved for mercenaries. Any who hadn't willingly surrendered their weapons had been executed, and dozens more had died in fierce fights that had broken out for the few scraps of food that had been provided. It hadn't taken long for Shrine to grasp that winning the hearts and minds of separatist fighters was no longer tops on Chancellor Palpatine's list. It also hadn't taken long for him to give up worrying about being found out, since he'd been placed in the custody of low-ranking clone troopers, whose armor blazes identified them as members of companies other than Commander Salvo's. The troopers had rarely spoken to any of the prisoners, so there'd been no news of the war or of events that might have prompted the High Council to order the Jedi to go into hiding. Shrine knew only that the fighting on Murkhana had stopped, and that the Republic had triumphed. He was considering the advantage of edging himself closer to where Shatak and Starstone stood, when a convoy of military speeders and big-wheeled juggernauts arrived on the scene. Commander Salvo and some of his chief officers stepped from one of the land speeders. From the hatch of one of the juggernauts emerged Commando Squad Leader Clymer and the rest of Ion Team. Shrine wondered about the timing of the commander's arrival. Perhaps Salvo was determined to have a close look at each and every prisoner before any were loaded into the transport. That Shrine was farther back from the leading edge of the crowd than Shatak and Starstone were meant nothing. Given the amount of time they'd spent with Salvo, he would have no trouble identifying all of them. Oddly, though, the commander wasn't paying much attention to the prisoners. His T-visor gaze was fixed instead on a Republic shuttle that was descending toward the landing field. "Theta class," one of the prisoners said quietly to the mercenary standing alongside him. "You don't see many of those," the second human said. "Must be one of Palpatine's regional governors." The shuttle had commenced its landing sequence. With ion drive powering down and repulsor lift engaged, the craft folded its long wings upward to provide access to the main hold, then settled gently to the ground. No sooner had the boarding ramp extended than a squad of elite troopers filed out, the red markings on their armor identifying them as Coruscant shock troopers. A much taller figure followed, attired head to foot in black. "What in the moons of Bogdan? New breed of trooper? Only if someone furnished the cloners with a donor a lot taller than the original." Salvo and his officers hastened over to the figure in black. "Welcome, Lord Vader." "Vader?" the merc closest to Shrine said. "Lord," Shrine thought. "That's no clone," the first human said. Shrine didn't know what to make of Vader, although it was evident from the reaction of Salvo and his officers that they'd been told to expect someone of high rank. With his large helmet and flowing black cape, Vader looked like something borrowed from the Separatists, a grotesque, Grievous-like marriage of humanoid and machine. Salvo was gesturing to Clymer and the other commandos who'd remained at the Juggernaut. From inside the enormous vehicle floated a large anti-grav capsule with a transparent lid, which two of the commandos began to guide toward Vader's shuttle. As the capsule passed close to Shrine, he caught a glimpse of brown robes, and his stomach lurched into his throat. When the capsule finally reached Salvo, the commander opened an access panel in its base and removed 3 gleaming cylinders, which he proffered to Vader. Lightsabers. Vader nodded for the commander of his shock troopers to accept them. Then, in a deep, synthesized voice, said to Salvo,
"What were you saving the bodies for, Commander? Posterity?"
Salvo shook his head. "We weren't issued any instructions." Vader's gloved hand waved him silent.
"Dispose of them in any fashion you see fit."
Salvo was motioning Clymer to remove the anti-grav coffin when Vader stopped him.
"Have you forgotten anyone, Commander?"
Salvo regarded him. "Forgotten, Lord Vader?" Vader folded his arms across his massive chest.
6 Jedi were assigned to Murkhana, not 3.
Shrine traded brief glances with Shatak, who was also close enough to Vader to hear the remark. "I'm sorry to report, Lord Vader, that the other 3 evaded capture," Salvo said. Vader nodded.
"I already know that, Commander. And I haven't come halfway across the galaxy to chase them down."
He drew himself erect with a haughty air.
"I've come to deal with the ones who allowed them to escape."
Clymer immediately stepped forward. "That would be me. And us," the rest of Ion Team announced in unison. Vader stared down at the commandos.
"You disobeyed a direct order from High Command."
"The order made no sense at the time," Clymer answered for everyone. "We thought it might be a Separatist trick."
"What you thought has no bearing on this,"
Vader said, pointing at Clymer.
"You are expected to follow orders."
"And we follow any reasonable ones. Killing our own didn't qualify." Vader continued to point his forefinger at Clymer's chest.
"They weren't your allies, squad leader. They were traitors, and you sided with them."
Clymer stood his ground. "Traitors how? Because a few of them tried to arrest Palpatine. I still don't see how that warrants a death penalty for the lot of them."
"I'll be sure to notify the Emperor of your concerns."
"You do that." Shrine closed his mouth and swallowed hard. Jedi had tried to arrest Palpatine. The Republic now had an Emperor.
"Unfortunately, you won't be alive to learn of his response."
In one swift motion, he drew aside his cloak and pulled a lightsaber from his belt. Igniting with a snap hiss, the hilt projected a crimson blade. If Shrine had been confused earlier, he was now overwhelmed. A Sith blade? The 4 commandos fell back, raising their weapons. "We'll accept execution for our actions," Clymer said, "but not from some lapdog of the Emperor." Quickly, Salvo and his officers stepped forward, but Vader only showed them the palm of his hand.
"No, Commander. Leave this to me."
With that, he moved on the commandos. Spreading out, they fired, but not a single bolt made it past Vader's blade. Deflected bolts went straight through the helmet visors of 2 of the commandos, and in 2 furious sweeps, Vader opened the pair from shoulder to hip, as if they were flimsy ration containers. Clymer and the 3rd commando took advantage of the moment to break for the nearby tree line, firing as they fled. A deflection shot from Vader caught Clymer in the left leg, but the bolt didn't so much as slow him down. Vader tracked them, then motioned to his cadre of troopers.
"I want them alive, Commander Appo."
"Yes, Lord Vader."